Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 275. In this episode, I am joined by author C.R. Wiley. Literally, he's here in the studio with me. So, Chris, welcome.
Hey, John, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
We'll be discussing his recent work in the House of Tom Bombadil, a book-length investigation of the Old Forest's master and perennial enigma of the Lord of the Rings. Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air five to our patrons. And Chris, if you want to join me for the double up air five, be my guest. All right. We kind of do it like this.
All right.
Put our hands up and I count down. 3, 2, 1. Whoosh.
I got you.
There we go.
That's right. We're doing the high five virtually, right?
That's right. The virtual high five. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R. and Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien. And a shout out to our newest patron, David G. Thank you so much, David, for your pledge. And thank you to all of our patrons. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Tolkien Road. Right now and for the rest of January, if you make an annual pledge, you get 2 months free. That will land you a bunch of cool perks like episodes early and ad-free, 20% off all merchandise purchased through truemythspress.com, and exclusive access to this month's live stream, which is scheduled for Wednesday, January 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Learn more at patreon.com/Tolkien Road. All right, so our Tolkien quote of the week comes from letter 144. This is a letter that was written on April 25th, 1954, or dated April 25th, 1954. Tom Bombadil is not an important person to the narrative. I suppose he has some importance as a comment. I mean, I do not really write like that. He is just an invention, and he represents something that I feel important, though I would not be prepared to analyze the feeling precisely. I would not, however, have left him in if he did not have some kind of function. So I think that's a great jumping off point for our discussion today. It's a quote that our guest deals with in his book. And, so this is the book we're going to be talking about today, In the House of Tom Bombadil. So, Chris, before we dive in, tell us about yourself and especially your own journey with Tolkien.
All right. Well, as you know, I'm a writer, but I'm also a pastor, and I've been involved in other things. I was a professor of philosophy for about a decade and spent some time in real estate investing and construction. And I also dabble in visual arts, stuff like that. So I've got 3 grown children, and I'm married, of course, and live in the state of Washington, although I've got another home in the state of Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So what was the first time you came across J.R.R. Tolkien, and when did his writings really start to play a part in your life to the point at which you would write a book about one of his characters?
Yeah, that's that. I was just talking about this yesterday to a group of people. It was probably 1972.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a professor at Washington U in St. Louis. And he was in our little living room in our apartment in Olivet, Missouri. And he was reading The Fellowship of the Ring. And he wasn't the sort of person who read, out loud to his kids. But for some reason, he started reading aloud. And the part of the story that he was in at that point was that they were in the mines of Moria. And so there was Merry and Pippin sitting by that well, wondering how deep it is or was. And I was kind of wondering too, as they sat there. So the 3 of us were sitting by that well, and I think it was Pippin dropped the stone, and we all waited to hear it hit, and it did. And what was awakened by the sound of that stone, and the story was a bad thing, but what was awakened in me was a good thing. I was taken by the images, and that just kind of flooded my mind. And just a few years later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, I was really looking for something to read, and I remember that story, and I didn't know much about it. I was maybe 12, 13 at the time. And so I picked up The Hobbit. I read The Hobbit, just, consumed it in great gulps. And then went on to read The Lord of the Rings, and then even went on to read the Silmarillion when it first came out. I think it was that in 78 or 79.
77.
Oh, 77. Okay.
But yeah, that era.
Yeah. But it came out, and so I was, eager to read it. And as everybody knows, it's a different experience.
Yes, for
particularly for a high school kid, But I did manage to get through it, and I've read it a number of times since. But that's how I got into it, and I got into Tolkien's work, and it was it's affected me deeply, and I've always used Tolkien ever since as kind of the measure in my mind for a good story, which means that there aren't many good stories in the world, because there aren't many stories that are as good as that one.
I know that feeling for sure. I feel like going deep in Tolkien's work has almost ruined me for a lot of other writers.
Right.
There are things that I used to enjoy that just don't quite do it for me anymore.
Yeah.
Not everything, but a good number of things for sure.
Yeah.
Two further comments on your story. One of those things is probably just, and some people are going to want to destroy me for saying this, but stories like Star Wars, and that's funny because that came out in kind of that same era as the Silmarillion. But ever since I got into Tolkien, Star Wars just doesn't have the same thing for me. Now that's partly because the latest Star Wars movies are a little subpar. I'm a little hopeful for some of the TV shows that I've been seeing, but the other thing, I just love that image of you as a young man, or even as a boy, like your dad reading you that passage from the Mines of Moria. Because for me, that was one of the most enchanting things that really drew me into the mind of Tolkien, was this sense of like this question of like, okay, how far down does it go? How detailed is the history? It's almost like that's a symbolic question.
Yeah,
right.
I like that observation. Right. And I think there are references to or allusions to, things being down there that no one knows.
Right. It's just one of the most,
right.
That's one of the most amazing things about his writing, is that sense, and that deliberate sense of wanting to create a feeling that there's a real history here, that there's something under every rock,
Yeah. And that depth is also sublime in the sense that, it dwarfs us, and it gives us a feeling of, I guess, awe, but also makes us a little uneasy, in a good way, kind of like the watcher at the gates, what is that thing,
Right.
You go back into the legendarium and look, what is there any other references? No, just that's your only encounter with that thing, and there's no backstory, at least that I'm aware of. Maybe you know more about it than I do, but
well, it's one of those things where if Tolkien had the lifespan to dig into that, he probably didn't know the whole story either, but he probably would have loved to spend
right.
a few weeks digging into it and creating the backstory for
right
it.
right
So, yeah, beautiful. Well, after a great foreword by noted Tolkien scholar Brad Berzer, you open things up with an apology. So that seems like a really odd way to start a book. What are you apologizing for?
Well, the presumption of trying to interpret Tom Bombadil. So I wanted to, let everybody know that I don't think of myself as an authority on Tom Bombadil, or like the final word on him or anything like that. But there were a lot of things I found in Tom, and I think, these are things that Tolkien was thinking about, and not just intentionally with Tom, but just in general, in terms of his own scholarship and his own interests. So I wanted to get into those things, and anyway, but I wanted to make sure I framed things appropriately, and I also wanted, Professor Tolkien, if he ever gets a chance to read that, to know.
Right.
I'm sorry for being that presumptuous.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, you don't want to. You don't want to go too far. You don't want to cross over any lines. And you do a good job, I think, in that section of really dealing with this whole question of allegory, and of not being, too on the nose about anything. And I really appreciate that. You're beginning with that note, because make sure I'm loud enough here. I really appreciate your beginning with that note, because you know, Tolkien was very clear that he wasn't trying to create a story where you were supposed to kind of see this like little cutesy symbolism in every single detail of the story. That doesn't mean to say that there wasn't what he would have called applicability, right? And that doesn't even mean that there weren't things that he perhaps had in mind as he was writing. But his point at the end of the day was to tell an amazing story.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's what people go to him for. I mean, if you feel like there's some kind of sneaky agenda, then your guards up.
Right.
But I think everybody comes to Tolkien openly because they don't feel like there's some hidden agenda. But that doesn't mean he's writing something that's just mere entertainment. Although entertainment's great, I don't have anything against it. But I mean, I think that any writer who is as informed and as scholarly and as knowledgeable as Tolkien has to, sort of write with those things that concern him in mind, and they're going to find their way into his works.
Yeah, great. So let's get into really the meat of the book. So chapter 1, you do sort of an overview of the different theories of Tom that have been put forward over the years. This is a favorite topic of hardcore Tolkien fans to really dig into. Who is Tom Bombadil? Who is who is this guy? There's been some kind of interesting theories, some kind of crazy theories. I mean, tell us a little bit about some of the theories that you mentioned and why maybe you're like, not quite.
Yeah, well, I'm a favorite for those who are familiar with the Exodus, in the Bible. In the 3rd chapter, there you have Moses ask essentially the same question that Frodo asks of Goldberry and Tom. Who are you?
Right.
He asks, "Who shall I say sent me?" And the response is, "Tell them I am." And so when Frodo asks Goldberry who Tom is, and she says he is, you can't help but make the connection if you know those two stories.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But then Tolkien dismissed that. He said, no, it's, because this would be a Iluvatar then, some kind of incarnate or theophanous kind of manifestation of Iluvatar. And it kind of would make sense because the guy is powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. And, but Tolkien said, no, you can't go there. I was like, okay, so if it's not that, then what? And then I think, there's a range of things from kind of the pedestrian. He's a Dutch doll. Doesn't explain anything,
right?
To he's one of the Maiar, and I think with regard to the options that the legendarium presents to us, that's probably the best, the options. But it's never entirely clear. But of course, it's not clear that Gandalf is also one, and so is Saruman, and so is Sauron, and so we shouldn't expect Tolkien to give that away either. So. But if we were going to limit ourselves to the legendarium, I think that's the best option.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me go back to this quote of the week that I read at the beginning of the episode. I love how Tolkien just hems and haws about this, right? He's I feel like he does know, but then again, he doesn't actually want to give it away. He loves that he's this enigmatic figure in the story. And it's almost, I feel like this is part of good storytelling is you don't give away all of your secrets, right? You want people to just wrestle and not have the final answer, not have you just come right out and say it. And I love that he calls him a comment.
Yeah. Right.
Because that could mean so many different things, right? But it really is like he's a bunch of comments, almost.
Yeah, and he says that he serves a purpose, but he's not willing to analyze his feelings precisely. He dances around here, but you're right. I mean, great authors are good at keeping secrets. I write fiction. I don't have any pretense, to being a great author, but I have a hard time keeping my secrets. So I admire, if this is, the case, I admire his self-control. But I think we have an example in C.S. Lewis of the same thing. And, when Michael Ward wrote Planet Narnia, published Planet Narnia, it was like, of course, it's so obvious. I mean, this man's scholarship, speaking of C.S. Lewis, his other writings are all about the planets. How did we miss 7 books
Right.
on these different themes, and then he just brings it to the surface and you're like, of course. So I don't have any, I'm not claiming that I have that kind of insight into Bombadil. I think that Michael Ward was right about Narnia, but I don't have any sort of smoking gun or anything like that I can point to. But I do think that there are things going on for sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and I'm actually jumping a little ahead on this comment, but one of the things you mentioned is this, much later on in the book, I believe it's chapter 5 or chapter 6, is this question of contemplation, right? That certain things are there not for us to just have the answer for, but to contemplate, right? And when I really get down to it, that seems to be where Tom Bombadil lands for me, right? Yeah, we all want to know, is he a Maiar? Is he a Valar? Is he a is he Iluvatar incarnate? Is he Tolkien himself, right? Some people have said he's Tolkien himself.
My daughter-in-law had an interesting theory about a Valar Tolkien.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I don't really agree, but I think that's pretty cool connection.
Yeah. I can kind of see where that would go. That would be an interesting theory to explore. I'd have to hear the argument for it, but I can see where knowing what I do about Tolkien, I could see that being an interesting argument.
Yeah. The laughter, the power. Yeah,
for sure. I've always pictured, I guess, Tolkien is a little more muscle bound.
Yeah, the same way. Right.
Tolk the Hulk, but but who knows? I'd love to hear the argument. Maybe he retired, after the first stage. So.
Yeah, your body kind of goes to pot after you've been an athlete,
Fair enough. So, and actually, before I move on to chapter 2. One thing, and I can't remember whether it was in the apology or chapter 1, you actually quoted a verse from the book of Proverbs, which I feel like is kind of like my life verse. It's one of my all-time favorite biblical verses. I can never quite get it right, but it's the essence of it. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it's the glory of kings to seek it out, right? To discover it.
Yep.
And
it's good enough for me.
Yeah. I mean, and I found that so true. And in terms of, especially when it comes to works of literature, just works of art, like, when I was younger, I wanted to have the answers kind of fed to me. But as I've grown older, and I've just found so much joy in the contemplative act, right?
Yeah, there are different ways to understand wisdom. We'll probably get to that. But one of those has to do with the ability to sort of master a subject versus being mastered by the truth. And the wise wisdom traditionally understood was the second.
Excellent. So speaking of mastery, chapter 2, it deals with Tom as the master, right? Which he is referred to as in the Lord of the Rings. So you contrast that image of Tom as master with none other than Saruman. So why is that?
Well, I think that's, when we talk about, or when we think about what's the purpose, how does he serve the story? I think that Tom is as a foil to Saruman and to Sauron, but to a kind of fallen sort of way of understanding dominion. So in that dialogue between Goldberry and Frodo, when she says he's the master, the thing that Frodo says is, does that means that everything around this place belongs to him? And she's like, oh no. This is the oddest thing you could do is make that connection. Whereas it's the first connection that Frodo makes. And I think it's the connection we all make. If you're the master, you're the owner. That's not the case with Tom. He's the master. And then what that does is it creates, this I guess, question, which is, what could it possibly mean to be the master without being an owner? And so that's what I try to explore in that chapter is how that is. But in terms of how this relates to Saruman is very much a the dominator. So I try to make a contrast between dominion properly understood and domination, which would be a fallen expression or exercise of dominion.
Absolutely.
So, and then how knowledge relates to each.
Mhm.
That's really key. So because Tom knows a lot, he knows the origin of things. He knows the songs that these things need to hear.
Yeah.
So and what Saruman knows is how to control things,
Mhm.
how to make them do what he wants.
Yeah.
And there's so many places in the Lord of the Rings where in the narrative, Tolkien gets at that.
Mhm.
This need to control and to know in a way that makes control possible, and that's Saruman's project.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yes. Sorry. And maybe that brings this idea of Tom being this comment into a little clearer focus, right? There's the famous scene of Tom uh, just completely having total disregard for the ring, like no other character in the story, right?
Right.
He's able to it, and it feels like that's part of that. That's a major part of that comment. That this is what it would look like to be completely free of any desire to dominate in the way that a Saruman or a Sauron wants to.
Yeah, and what's intriguing about it is how masterfully Tom conducts himself in that whole episode. So he says to Frodo, "Show me the precious ring," in a command.
Right. Yeah.
And Frodo just immediately, "Okay, here you go." And there's no other place in the story where Frodo is so flippant.
Oh, if anybody else said that to Frodo, he would be like, "Why do you want the ring?" Oh,
yeah, right. It's very suspicious. Even someone like Gandalf or Elrod,
Mm-hmm.
So there you have that, and then he just makes light of it. When he puts it to his eye, I can't help but think he's mocking Sauron.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, right, with the
right.
eye. Right. Yeah.
Right. The eye of Sauron, and then he puts it on his. And Tolkien makes a point of saying his little finger. So it's sort of like this is something that is as taken as lightly as you can possibly take it. And then, he's laughing the whole time. And then, of course, the hobbits are shocked that he doesn't disappear. And then he makes the ring disappear.
Right.
like your uncle at after dinner.
Right.
Then he hands it back, just casually to Frodo. Here you go.
Right.
And then if you remember, Frodo is kind of put out by all of this. He's making light of this very important matter that everybody else is just so serious about. And so Frodo puts the ring on and tries to sneak away, and then Tom just looks at him. Get back here!
Right.
I mean, that's showing off right there.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is a cute little trinket. Yeah, when everybody else is just like, this thing is like going to be the undoing of us all.
Yeah, Gandalf's like, don't give it to me.
That's right. That's right. So chapter 3 really may have been my favorite. It concerns the nature of nonsense, especially of the language used by Tom. So why is it important not to be dismissive of the nonsensical rhymes that Tom often deals in? Because that's the thing we hear from so many people that don't like Tom Bombadil as a character. They're like, oh, he's the most annoying. I mean, I've seen tons of comments from people over the years. Yeah. He's so annoying. Like, so glad Peter Jackson didn't put him in the movies and everything. But why shouldn't we be dismissive of Tom, and especially of his kind of the rhymes and that sort of nonsense nature?
Yeah, well, I can't say too much about the dismissiveness of people in this regard, because I kind of like those rhymes. I guess it says something about me. It's kind of maybe I'm as silly and ridiculous as Tom, but I think the reason why we shouldn't is in, again, the narrative. We're told that his songs seemed like nonsense. Mm-hmm. I think Tolkien wasn't a person who used words in a haphazard way. I think every word was thoughtfully placed. Mm-hmm. Now, there are a lot of authors you can't say that about. I think a lot of authors, there's just a lot of froth and there's not much thought. But I think everything Tolkien wrote was intentional. He may have said more than he realized he was saying, but what he said, he meant to say. Mm-hmm. So there's that. But then there's just the evidence that songs are really efficacious. They really do stuff. Particularly that scene with the barrow-wight.
Yes.
Where he casts them into the outer darkness. It's like, whoa, that's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the songs, and according to Tom, that set things right. So with the episode with Old Man Willow, he tells the hobbits that he's going to sing them free.
Right.
So it's the songs. So those are the reasons. We may find them trite or annoying, but how can you take yourself seriously if you take the story seriously in light of the things that happen?
Right. I did want to read a little snippet from the very end of that chapter because I really liked this quote. So you say, and this is the very last paragraph in that chapter 3. With all this in mind, perhaps, just perhaps, the reason Tom's songs seemed like nonsense to readers of The Lord of the Rings and to the hobbits is because Tom knows the music of the world and we do not. And if that's so, then maybe what we think and say is the real nonsense. So yeah, I just love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Great observation.
Well, it ties into the music of the Nur. And I think, of course, when, The Lord of the Rings is published, we don't know about the music of the Nur.
Mm-hmm.
We only learned about that years later after Tolkien is gone. It's
right.
published posthumously, but he knew, but it's not something that is out of keeping with the Western tradition. We've all the way back to Pythagoras and, throughout, the history of Western thought, there's been this conviction that, mathematics and music, they go together, and that the movements of the spheres, if we could hear them, we would hear their music. And so this is something that's been with us for a long time. And I don't think we'd even need to have the Sumerian to be able to intuit that if we had a sense of what the Western tradition tells us.
Great. So chapter 4 deals with, a little bit further with this question of nature. You used this term earlier, the term dominion. You use it quite frequently here and throughout the book. What does this term mean in regard to the relationship between humans and nature? And even just what do you mean by nature overall?
Yeah. Well, to address the second matter first, we live in a time where nature has been stripped of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that Tolkien would have agreed with, or did agree with. The Inklings were all about sort of re-enchanting the world, not in the sense that imaginatively imbuing the world with meaning, but helping us to see that it's full of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there are given ends. There are natures that things possess that are givens. And so those are things that were traditionally in mind up until the scientific revolution in the West, when those other matters, the teleological or the formal causes of things, were stripped away so that we just had the efficient material causes. And of course, that's precisely what Saruman wants. It's just those forces so that he can impose his own will on, and same thing with Sauron and Melkor, I'd argue, and so forth. So I think that Tolkien and his story is it fits into this larger debate in the West about the nature of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly Tolkien and all the Inklings are on one side.
Yeah.
And they're arguing against the modernist and so forth. But they're not doing it in a pedantic way. They're doing it in a way that is intended to sort of bring to the surface things that we all kind of know,
mm-hmm.
and maybe don't want to know sometimes because we don't want things to work the way they do. We want them to work the way we want them to.
Good point.
So I think that's but this gets us back to dominion. So if dominion is not the imposition of my will upon sort of meaningless matter and energy, but is something more in keeping with stewardship,
mm-hmm.
Things have their given meanings and purposes, and consequently, I need to receive those gratefully and honor, the nature or the natures of other creatures and
mm-hmm.
and people. And Tolkien is very clear in many places in his letters and so forth, and other writings about his interest in how we should properly regard the others in our world and the natural world itself. He's something of a tree hugger,
Sure.
but not quite in the way that maybe the earth, first people are and stuff, but
Sure. Yeah.
but he was a lover of things that should be the objects of our love.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that dominion in that respect is what we ought to be, keep in mind, particularly when we are introduced to, the first chapters of Genesis, where Adam is told to take dominion. What does that mean? Is it Saruman we're talking about here? Is Adam the first Saruman? Imposing his will upon a meaningless world? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I sure hope not. I'd rather be like Tom than like Saruman or Sauron.
Right.
You in chapter 5, you devote to kind of looking closely at Goldberry, who's a really interesting figure because she's throughout the whole section of the book that deals with Tom. She's right there and she's very present. But obviously, Tom kind of steals center stage. But Goldberry is there. She speaks, several times, and Tom seems very fixated on her.
Yeah.
So I thought you had a really interesting thesis here. So tell us a little bit more about Goldberry and about this Ginny Green Teeth.
Right.
So.
Well, if you're familiar with the folklore of Europe, you know that water spirits are generally female,
mm-hmm.
and they're kind of enigmatic. They're, they can be kind of scary. You're not really sure you want to get to know them. So the story of, the legend of Ginny Greenteeth, or the folklore surrounding her, she's a water fae. She is, I believe, if I remember correctly, in the north west of England, is where she was believed to reside. Her long green teeth were used to catch small children who got too close to the water and drown them. She would bring them into the water.
You can just see the parents telling the kids this story to keep them away.
Right. And I note in the book that I actually knew a man who lost a child that way. The child fell into a pond and drowned. The child was maybe just a toddler.
Yeah.
So it was if that was the only thing to, the only purpose for Ginny Greenteeth to keep the kids away from the water, it's worth,
that makes me recall you met one of my sons on the way in here, and when he was a toddler, we were having our pictures taken near a pond, and he actually fell in, and I like literally caught him by the leg upside down, and pulled him out. Kids, there's something about kids, like especially little kids, and having the propensity to fall into ponds.
Right. So
like
these water features, you could say, are ambiguous in the sense that we need them. They're home to living creatures, but they also are means by which the things remain fertile. We need this kind of natural irrigation process that implies there are going to be ponds and streams and stuff. But in my research, there's a marvelous encyclopedia by a woman named Carol Rose, and she gives you kind of it's an encyclopedia. And so I'm just reading through this thing, looking at water fae. Every single one of them are like this, anywhere in Europe, they're like this. And then we have this water fae in Goldberry, and she has something, in common with them, but there's obviously this big difference as well. But I stumbled across a kind of a Finnish a story about a water fae. This is a group of people who have Finnish ancestry who lived in the Soviet Union, and they had a water fae who was named, if I remember correctly, the River Devil's daughter. Wow. That's what jumped out at me. I said, okay, river. And then she had long golden hair, and if you caught her, you could make her your wife. Anyway, of course, I'm thinking at that point, because I'm, got The Adventures of Tom Bombadil in my mind, is that's exactly what happens. And,
right. Yeah.
And then she's his wife.
Yeah.
So, and that particular poem, I think that it's a flirtatious, it's kind of, there's a mutual attraction. I don't think that she's actually trying to kill Tom in the poem. I think she's she's taken with him, and the kind of the way he's taken with her, and is a kind of
and this refers to an older poem. It's not actually from the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Yeah.
It's written or published back in, I think, was it 1934?
I believe in that time frame. That there's a part of that in the quote that I excised because it just felt a little bit irrelevant, but I think it actually says it was published in 1933.
33, yeah. Okay. And that means it's older than The Hobbit.
Right.
So in a way, he could say that Tom really is the oldest creature in Middle Earth because he's the first one to be invented. But getting back to Goldberry, I think that there's something going on here that is important from, I guess, the standpoint of Christian civilization. So in Christian civilization, there's this question: how do we regard the artistic works or the philosophical works or the works of imagination that we receive from pagan sources, pre-Christian sources? And there are basically two approaches. One is the scorched earth method. We just get rid of it all, and the other is we find ways to incorporate them and redeem them, so to speak, by bringing out the sort of latent qualities that are good, that reflect God's image in those people who created those characters. And I think that's what both Lewis and Tolkien were really good at. Mm-hmm. They took that approach to things.
Absolutely. They certainly excelled at that. And when I read that particular section that you just referred to, it reminded me of a line and kind of in a way, the whole, I'm not sure if you've read his essay on Beowulf. But there's a section in there where he literally poses that question. He says, and I'm not going to quote it correctly, but he basically says, shall we simply, consign our heathen fathers, right, to perdition, right?
Yeah, right.
Or is there something there? Are there things there that are worthwhile? And that question for him was was a question that was at the heart of Beowulf scholarship, right? Of how, and I think partly what made his essay on Beowulf a very influential one in Beowulf studies.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that image. I really love your treatment of Goldberry, and I think there's a lot there. I love this idea that because I guess my picture of what I think Tom actually represents is came into a lot clearer focus as I read your book, and then seeing Goldberry in that regard, also kind of is helping things come into even clearer focus. It's the sense of that Tom, if he is the master, right, that he's the good master. And it's hard for us to think of this word master and think in a good sense in our particular context. Yeah. It has a lot of bad connotations associated with it, but there's, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing in and of itself. And to the notion of, that Goldberry is perhaps calling him, the master in the sense of being her master as well, in the sense of she is she was, this river fae, as you say, and then kind of pulled out from that, right? Or mastered, I guess you could say, by him to the point where they can now have a harmonious relationship.
Yeah, I think that's right. And she seems pretty happy.
Yeah, she does. Absolutely. Yeah. That's beautiful. Chapter 6. So the other big figure, there's really two. We didn't speak too much about Old Man Willow, and if you do want to say anything about Old Man Willow, be my guest. But I was going to mention the barrow-wight because he's the other important figure in this whole episode with Tom Bombadil, the three meaty chapters that cover Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings. Tom helps us to see something about the nature of evil when he's interacting with the barrow-wight. So, how is that?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of questions that people have had for time out of mind about the nature of evil, and that's even a weird way to describe it, because nature and evil are kind of, you could say, antithetical to one another. But so how does it work? When we encounter the barrow-wight, this is a dark creature that doesn't seem to have any direct connection to, say, the Pursuit of the Ring,
Mhm.
Although I know that there are people who've wondered, perhaps there was some kind of message sent, to the barrow-wight to obtain the ring, that kind of stuff. That's a lot of, I don't know what to make of that. But I think there is an allusion in the chant of the barrow-wight to the Dark Lord. And whether he's referring to Melkor or Sauron, I don't know, probably Sauron. It seems like the barrow-wight's origin is in the evil, men that serve the Witch King, at the very top of the Misty Mountains, and
Right.
all that. So, and that's of course the Lord of the Nazgul. So how does evil get its work done? There is a kind of hierarchy. Clearly he's referred to as a lord. And but how does this reflect, or maybe be, how is it kind of like a mockery of genuine hierarchy? So hierarchy is a word that's gotten a lot of bad press. It just means sacred order.
Yeah.
And so how does sacred order come to represent evil for many people? I think, well, it's the exercise of a kind of hierarchy that is a mockery of the genuine thing. And so that, Lewis in his book, Screwtape Letters, talks about the bureaucracy of hell. And there's a kind of bureaucracy to Mordor. It doesn't seem like anybody does anything because they want to. It's because they're compelled to, or because they're afraid of not doing it, that kind of thing.
Right.
Which reminds me of lots of things that I've encountered in bureaucracies.
Sure.
But so there's all of that. And but when the hobbits are captured by this barrow-wight, they're brought into this tomb. And it's marvelous that Tom more or less expects that to happen.
Yeah.
After he does warn them not to do certain things, and they do those very things. And
right.
then but he does equip them with a song, or a rhyme, and they're supposed to sing this if they get in trouble. And he just is right there.
Right.
Boom. So it's like he's just waiting outside the tomb for the song,
Right.
And then he delivers them, and then he casts the barrow-wight into the outer darkness. And I can't say that I know of anything else in popular literature that better, I think, corresponds to the final judgment. Here's Tom essentially saving from the hand of these spectral hands
right.
of this barrow-wight, and delivering them from death, and consigning the barrow-wight to eternal death. And with just a word, to get out.
Right.
And then that long trailing shriek, and then like a door closing, he's gone. So just powerful thing. And now what Tom shows us there is that I think he's obviously on the side of the angels, and that the ultimate destiny and I think this is hinted at, there's no explicit, statement to this effect, but those of us who believe in an, eternal realm of happy and blissful, life in the presence of God, can't help but see something of that reflected in this moment in the story.
Wonderful. So, and then, that leads us on to the last chapter, where you really deal with, this idea of rest. Really, I think the thing I wanted to highlight here was Gandalf, towards the end of Lord of the Rings, says he's going to, after everything is done, after, essentially the battle, I can't remember, is it before or after the scouring of the Shire?
It's before. Remember, he tells the hobbits, you're going to have a surprise.
Yeah.
And then the hobbits say, well, we don't have anything to worry about, you're with us. And he says, no, I'm not.
So Gandalf says he's going to go have a conversation with old Bombadil, right? He's like, oh, my work here is done. Now I just want to go and kick back with Tom and have a long conversation. Um, I just think that's a really beautiful image of rest, and you highlight the important, like that Tom has something to say about the nature of rest itself.
Yeah, I think many of us, myself included, we derive kind of the meaning of our lives from our work.
Mm-hmm.
Work's a great thing, all for it. Um, and we kind of have a hard time imagining life without it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like we need evil to justify our goodness.
Right.
If all the dragons have been killed, what do we do now?
Right.
And so that's an idea that I think doesn't really do justice to goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if goodness needs evil to justify itself, then I mean, what kind of good is that?
Mm-hmm.
What goodness, historically understood in the Western tradition, is something that is good in and of itself, to be enjoyed for its own sake.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest from the labors is something that people have puzzled about, because what does that look like? And I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, and so I get the question all the time, won't heaven be boring and that kind of thing. I'm like, no.
Right.
It's probably going to be a whole lot more like the life of Tom and Goldberry. Just delight. Just think about this. This is the oldest guy. This is the oldest dude in the world, and he is just as happy as can be. And he just seems to be
nonsense songs.
And he's just taken with things that are around him, and he finds them interesting. And he knows all about the hobbits already. He's been kind of studying them from a distance, I guess, or maybe it's his conversations with what's his name? The mushroom farmer.
You've asked
me. I would ask that question right now.
The farmer maggot.
Farmer maggot. That's right. I knew it was something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so maybe it's because of that. But I think if you were told heaven is like Tom's house,
mm-hmm.
you'd be like, cool.
Yeah, that works.
That's right. So rest in my mind is I think exemplified by Tom. And then when we see Frodo at the Grey Havens, and he relives the dream, or what the dream he had in Tom's house, it comes to pass. And there's that's the final reference to Tom in the Lord of the Rings, is when Frodo is going into the uttermost west to the the undying lands. I can't help but say, okay, there's some things going on here that Tolkien is up to, and I don't think I'm doing any violence to the story by saying what, this is something that at the very beginning, I think Tolkien wanted us to have in mind all along. This is the happy ending. The happy ending is Tom's house.
I mean, I think you're spot on. It reminds me, there's several times within your book where you make reference to Leaf by Niggle, which is, I mentioned to you before we began, is a story that's very near and dear to my heart, and I mean it's to the heart of many Tolkien fans. I've always, there's so many things I love about that story, but I just always enjoy reading the very last kind of the last part of it, because it's I think it summarizes a lot of the themes that you explore in this book. Actually, there's the kind of bureaucrat, the three bureaucrats there having this conversation about this guy's utterly useless art, and then we find out that, like, in fact, these, Parrish and Niggle are like they're have basically moved on into what might be described as almost like a Bombadilish type of existence, right?
Right.
It's utterly beyond the mindset of these three people who are there, like looking down upon them and like laughing at them, like those three useless, that useless soul painter, like, just obsessed with his tree.
Well, it's a marvelous story. I agree. And I think Tolkien wrote it in part to console himself. He had this enormous project like Niggle, and he just, he's, if I remember correctly, this is published after The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. So I think Leaf is a reference to The Hobbit. The only thing that he feels like maybe will ever survive of all the things that he's, done.
Like, I've got the Silmarillion, I've got this new Hobbit,
Right. But then I think the real marvel of the story is that, in this, place that he arrives at from his journey. And I think it's pretty clear we're talking about death here. The train ride, he's
absolutely
distasteful. So he's dead, and there's the tree, as beautiful, more beautiful than he realized with his painting. And the question, of course, is the tree there because he made it, or is it always there and he saw it?
Yeah,
I think that's the big question. And Tolkien doesn't answer that question. I think that's a great thing to think about, particularly if you're a maker, if you're a poet. I know poesis, it just means making. And so in antiquity, when someone was called a poet, it didn't mean they just, wrote rhymes. It means that they were storytellers or in some way a maker. So if you're a maker, you're always concerned, well, what would become of what I've made?
Right.
And in the actual world, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, but in the mundane, which is a reference to this world,
right.
It does get used to patch a roof, and only one leaf remains. But in reality, in the real world, eternity, there it is.
Yeah.
So my life isn't a waste. My work isn't lost.
Right.
And furthermore, Parrish actually appreciates it now.
Yeah.
Before Parrish was just like those bureaucrats. What are you doing, wasting your time? Your potatoes are just not being cultivated.
Well, and within the story as well, it turns out that before Nigel moves on to, to kind of the next step where we don't know what that entails. We just know he's going like kind of, what did he say? It's almost like when C.S. Lewis says further up and further in. He's like, he's going further up and further into the mountains, right? Into this like restful place. And, but before that, like Nigel and Parrish are, they're working together to beautify. It's a really beautiful picture of these two kind of former neighbors who didn't get along. All of a sudden, like they are best friends and working on these things, and best friends in the best possible way. Truly beautiful. I had one more thought and then it escaped me because I was waxing poetic about Nigel and Parrish, but I'm sure it'll come back to me right as soon as we end the episode.
Right.
So just maybe kind of tell us a little bit, just to wrap it up. Just what do you hope people take away from this book, and what are your kind of final thoughts on Tom Bombadil?
Well, my hope is that Tom and his power will, in some sense, go with the reader. Follow after, and like I tried to make clear in the apology at the beginning of the book. I'm not trying to clear up a mystery so much as I'm trying to help people see the mystery, and. And if that's the case, then Tom will go with you, throughout the rest of your life, kind of as a consolation, or some person who can console you in different points of your life. So that was really my objective. I think this whole matter of juxtaposing dominion and domination, but also, and we didn't get into this, but this is another theme: control versus communion. What we ought to long for is genuine communion with the world and with other people, and dominion exercised in the way that it's intended to be exercised.
Yeah.
So if people are taken with those ideas, I'll be pleased.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. I love that you tie consolation into that, especially because that was, of course, on fairy stories. That's right. That's one thing he calls out as a chief function of fairy tales, right? That they're intended to be consoling, right? In the best possible way. So I did remember my other thing. So at the very end of On Fairy Stories, Tolkien, in the kind of postscript section there, he says, all tales may come true, right? I truly believe, after years of just kind of reading over Tolkien and just diving into his mind and his view of everything, that this was his a great part of his kind of genuine hope and vision of artistic work. His whole idea of subcreation was that our works actually will take on their own reality, right? They'll be completed in a way that we can't quite envision for ourselves.
Yeah, there actually is some theological basis for that in Irenaeus, but I think too, if we think about the creation story in the Silmarillion, what we have is subcreation going on with the Ainur. So Luvatar brings these beings into existence, not just as an audience, but as fellow laborers. So they're involved. Obviously, the goodness that they possess has been, granted to them. They're participating in the goodness of Iluvatar. And even, Melkor can't overcome that. His wickedness is somehow unfolded into the story and makes the story more poignant as a result. Does that mean evil is necessary? No, that's not what I'm intending to say. But nevertheless, darkness has not overcome the light, and that it's in the Bible.
Exactly. Beautiful. Well, Chris, thanks for writing this book and for joining us. It's been a great conversation. I truly enjoyed reading the book. So for all of you listening and watching, make sure to check out tolkienroad.com for show notes and a whole bunch of very helpful links, including a link to buy the House of Tom Bombadil, this book right here. Get that on screen one more time. Also, we'll have a link to Chris's website, crwiley.com, and then other video links from other episodes where we've discussed Tom Bombadil as well. Subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. And drop us a line. You can correspond with us in a number of ways, including the YouTube comments, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and email. Check the show notes for more details. And don't forget this month's live stream scheduled for this Wednesday, January 19th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. We'll be discussing the Silmarillion intro, the Walbin letter, Ainulindale, Valaquenta, Tom Bombadil, and whatever else you all would like to discuss. All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T., Red Hawk, Shannon S., Brian O., Emilio P., Zeke F., James A., James L., Chris L., Chuck F., Azia V., Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C., David of Pints with Jack, Jonathan D., Eric S., Eric B., Johanna T., Mike M., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, and Matthew M., and Joe Bagelman, as well as those celebrating their patron anniversary this month: Tyler W., Mike M., Alina V., Richard K., Melanie, Scott W., Jason T., David G., and John R. And Chris, thank you for sitting through my listing off of all of our patrons. I appreciate it.
Right. Great.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks once again, Chris. And thanks all for listening. We'll talk at you next time. Bye-bye.